All right, so the World Affairs Council of Greater Reading is the leading educational organization promoting understanding and enlightenment on global issues. WACReading.org is where you can follow along, find information on upcoming events, and access to our social media if you need to figure out where we are on other issues as well. So, with that, I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lausch, and then I'm going to get the slides ready for Dr. Medianick.
Well, thank you, Jess. Good morning, everyone. We want to have a special welcome to Dr. Timothy Medianick. Incidentally, I am Solomon Lausch, as Jess has just said. I'm president of the World Affairs Council here in Greater Reading. We're very happy today to have what for us will be a very personal presentation. Ukraine, a personal perspective. Dr. Timothy Medianick of Boulevard Dental Associates in Kenhorst is a native of the Ukraine, emigrating to the United States with his family. He's one of 10 children, I believe, and he was 15 when he arrived. He's a graduate of Messiah College and Temple University School of Dentistry, and he is a naturalized United States citizen. He has traveled to the Ukraine twice in recent years to perform much needed dental work in a Ukrainian orphanage and also for members of the Ukrainian military. He will share with us his perspective on the present situation in the Ukraine and relate, I know, some compelling human interest stories about treating soldiers and the children in the orphanage. Dr. Medianick, welcome.
Thank you, Solomon. It's really an honor that you invited me, and I would love to share with you guys about my experiences. Maybe first, I would like to tell a little bit about myself. And I come from Ukraine, and as we move through our conversation, there's some slides I would like to share so you can see a little bit of what we did when we went to Ukraine. And then also would like to touch on political situation in Ukraine as well, as it's been the last 7 years since Russia annexed Ukraine and came to the eastern part of Ukraine, took over 2 large regions. Maybe we can also touch on that a little bit, and we'll go from there. So my name is Tim Medianick, has already been mentioned, and I own Boulevard Dental Associates on Kenhorst Boulevard, just off Lancaster Avenue in Reading. You heard a little bit about my background, but I think it would be useful for you to better understand my background in Ukraine and how I got from there to here. Also, you can't really understand Ukraine of today until you understand Ukraine of the past. So it is my hope by speaking about my own experiences in Ukraine as a child, you can better understand Ukraine as we know it today. So Jesse, if you can, you have that first picture there of Ukraine. So I was born in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. You can see there right in the center. Let's see, I just lost my, okay, got it. Alrighty. So you can see, just to concentrate a little bit on the map here, you can see Ukraine is, as Ukrainians call it, right in the middle of Europe. You can see Poland, Romania, Moldova, Hungary, all of that area to the right of the pink line is Russia. Just above Kiev, that area that's not shown what it is, it's Belarus, and there's a lot has been happening there in the last 6 months to a year. So it's a very strategic area in the world as far as it relates to Russia and Ukraine and the rest, and Europe as well. So my parents had 10 children, 6 boys and 4 girls. I'm the oldest boy there. I have 2 older sisters. My father worked as an ambulance driver to provide for our family, and my mother was at home with the children. My mother came from intellectual background, and she managed to emphasize the importance of my education and my brothers and sisters' education, both at school and in piano studies at music school. My parents were both Baptist Christians. This is significant for several reasons. First, there were very few Christian denominations in Ukraine during this time. But what is the most significant about this is that most Baptist Christians chose not to become part of Communist Party because of the party's anti-Christian beliefs and their intolerance to the religious freedom. So both of my parents knew they would not be permitted to go to college because they were not members of the Communist Party. My mother, she took the college entrance exams anyway. She knew every answer in the test, but they still failed her. In fact, the school board came to her parents and asked for a meeting stating that she could go to any university if they denounced their faith in God. So obviously they could not do that. So she graduated as valedictorian in her class, but going to school, to college, to university was not in her future. Growing up in Soviet Union, for those who would not associate themselves with communist government, was not easy, as you can imagine. I'm sure you heard stories about that. Both of my father's parents were put in prison under Stalin's regime. So both of my grandparents served their sentences because they were not part of Communist Party. My grandfather served 5 years and my grandmother served 7 years, and they were away at the same time while leaving several children at home to fend for themselves. One of them was a baby, was not even walking yet. A couple of these children died while they were away imprisoned. My grandmother was the only woman who survived the woman's prison. And my grandfather also was able to eventually return. So back together again, and now in their mid-40s. They had another child, and their child was my father. So if my grandparents never returned from the prison, I would not be here today. In school, I was taught that America was evil and had capitalists who still owned slaves. When I came over here, I realized that you guys were doing the same thing to us, saying that we were evil, and I can understand why. And there's a lot of truth to that. And just watching the Rocky movies and all those that kind of shone a light on how you guys were seeing us. In the late 80s, before the breakup of Soviet Union, food shortages became a pretty much daily occurrence. We had recently experienced what it's like not to have certain items in light of the pandemic, but it was common for us to go in the store and not find any food. And when the word would spread out that something just came to the store, we would run to the store, get in line first to find out what they're selling. And I just remember standing in line for 2 hours as a kid, 11 years old, for chicken. And then by the time I got to the front, it was gone. Now, a little bit about how my family got from Ukraine to the United States. In the late 80s, the American government was offering asylum to some families in Soviet Union during Bush administration, George H.W. Bush. They opened the door for religious freedom for some families. And my parents applied, and we were amazingly chosen to come. So as you can imagine, I was 13 years old, and in a plane from Moscow to New York, it was like going to Disney for the first time as a kid. I saw America as something out of this world. We heard some stories about it and just couldn't wait to come here. And my 13-year-old mind could not wait to see everything. And even I didn't know a lick of English. So this was my entrance into the whole new world. My family moved to Levittown, Pennsylvania, here in Bucks County. And this is where I tried my first McDonald's hamburger and thought it was like the best thing ever. School was a bit more challenging. I could not speak English, but I could do math because Soviet math was ahead of American one. And I remember kids coming to me for help in math, even though I couldn't speak back to them. But I worked hard in school. In addition to school, I also took a job in the evenings at the factory. And I regularly attended music school near Philadelphia, going there 3 times a week for piano. And I was also in jazz band and marching band at my high school. I was a pretty busy kid. As graduation approached, I began to consider college and eventually want to become a dentist. So as you heard, I went to Messiah College near Harrisburg, and that's where I met my wife. Her name is Anne. Going through college, my most significant accomplishment, I think, was getting an A, not in organic chemistry or physics, but in English class. I studied hard and did well academically as a biology student. And I was on my way to become first person in my family to graduate from college. So then I was accepted to dental school, and we were married after the first year of dental school. So now, that's why a little bit of my background. Now, how do we get to go to Ukraine now as a dentist? I met a Ukrainian national who is a dentist through my brother, Paul. His name is Vova. Vova has a heart of service. He goes to provide dental services to the front lines since the war started near the Russian-Ukrainian border. He goes to orphanages and cares for the handicapped in his hometown as well. So when I met him, he expressed the need for some dental supplies and materials. So we end up providing those dental tools and materials because these supplies were very difficult to get and they're very expensive for them. So at the same time, Vova was kind of trying to recruit me to come to serve with him in Ukraine. So I decided to make a trip, and I had not been there since I left at 13. I met Vova, this Ukrainian dentist, and we traveled to the eastern part of Ukraine, to the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. As we were approaching that area, you can see the economic crisis in the east was very obvious. And we finally approached the gate that separated the civilian life and military life. And this was, it felt real. We entered a battle zone. The mobile dental clinic that we were situated next to was only 1 mile away from the fighting. When I got there, I asked the soldier, so where is the front line? Where's all this happening? And he pointed to he said, see that in the distance, the tree line, that's where they're at. And it was only about 1 mile away. If you've never been in a battle zone or in a war or in the military, initially it's very jarring to hear the bombs exploding. It sounded like powerful fireworks. There's usually, when the bomb goes off, there's usually two sounds. One when it goes off, and one when it lands. I prefer the first one and not the second one. You never knew where it's going to land. Unfortunately, while I was there, 2 Ukrainian soldiers were killed and 5 were wounded. And at that time, as actually to that now as well, the Ukrainian military is being bombed every day. So we slept and ate in a same building where Senator John McCain and Ukrainian President Poroshenko celebrated New Year just 5 months before that. So we had soldiers lined up every morning. And you can, Jesse, you can go now to the next slide to show me working as soldiers. Yeah, thank you. So they would line up every morning. They come in a big truck, and they would wait all day for the dental services. Ukrainian government provides these soldiers with very poor dental care, and the only decent care they receive is from volunteer dentists. Many of these soldiers are actually never saw a dentist before for preventative care. And when you look at their mouth, you could already see that they're missing some teeth already as young guys. A lot of dentistry is very poor in Ukraine because there's a lot of government corruption. Actually, when we were there, the soldiers were saying that they did not have money to fuel their trucks. There's so much corruption in the government that that money does not even get to the soldiers. So we actually gave them some money to fuel their trucks. So we worked there from morning until 10 in the evening, so that we could see every soldier who was waiting. And you can go to the next slide, Jesse. And this is some of the guys and the lady, the soldiers that we treated. Awesome people, great guys. They're very patriotic. They're there to protect Ukraine, to protect the sovereignty, and they have such a strong spirit. I love those people. Love them. So after I returned back home, I had an opportunity to finance a mobile dental clinic that Vova could use to treat the less fortunate in Ukraine and the Ukrainian soldiers as well in the war zone. So opportunity came for us to buy an ambulance van. So we got it from Germany. It was a used ambulance van, and we brought it back to Ukraine, and we furnished it with a dental chair and dental equipment. We also painted green. Actually, you can go to the next slide to show this van. Okay, thank you. So we painted green so we can take it to the war zone as well. So we took this van this time to the orphanage though. So this time my wife and my two daughters returned to Ukraine with me, and our main destination was Mykhaylivka Orphanage in the Cherkasy region. It's about 3 hours south of Kiev. So if you remember the map, that first map that we show, you go straight down 3 hours. That's where we were. Honestly, I did not know what to expect. I heard some stories of orphanages. What was surprising is that the orphans swarmed around the van as we arrived. When I was working, they would peek through the windows in order to catch a glimpse of me working. When I exited the van, I was surrounded by them, and they would not let me go. Several begged me to do their teeth next, and they would do anything to get your attention. And those kids were starving for affection and for compliments and for hugs. When I would sit them down before I work on them, I asked them about their family, about what's going on, and a little bit just to get to know them, get them to relax. And it was very, very, very sad, at the least, to hear about their brutal upbringings. They're either being abandoned or losing their parents to addiction. And some of them describe the graphic things that they witness as 7, 8-year-olds. You can go to the next slide, me showing they're working with an orphaned kid. Yes, this is a great kid. So Vova was assisting me. We began our work there early each morning, and our work day extended late into the night again. We did all we could, as much as we could. I felt like after leaving that it was like a drop in the bucket of what we did. So there's so much that could be done. So we helped, we kind of triaged all the kids the first day, and just to find out the most serious problems first, and then moved to the less serious issues. So we tried to relieve all their pain and repair all the teeth that we could. Many of these children had cavities that were in a decay, that were long neglected. The government does provide dentists, the local dentists that would come and serve an orphanage, but their work was usually very poor, and sometimes they would mark that things were done, but they were never done, so they just collect the money. So it shows how much corruption is there. So my wife and my kids were able to serve there. They actually helped to lead the camp, and we slept in a room next to where the orphans slept. We shared the same bathrooms that smelled with an odor that is not easily forgotten. And we showered in the same showers that rained dust, this rusty water that smelled like sulfur. Also, you can go to the next slide, Jess. Okay, so here we provided orphans with soccer balls and shoes and vitamins and other things. This was in part possible because of the donations from some of my patients from my practice and also from my Boulevard Dental team here. I'm so grateful for their generosity and just shows the character of the people in our country. I want to thank them publicly right now for doing that. So my plan right now is to go back to Ukraine in May of next year. Boba is the one who usually organizes that for us. So it could be the East or it could be somewhere in another orphanage. So this is a little bit of my background and my 2 trips that we did, and maybe now would be appropriate time for us to talk a little bit about situation in Ukraine as it relates to politics. As I made it clear already that Ukraine has a very long history of corruption, and each time people hope that things will change with a new political leader coming to power, it has always fallen short of the reform that people hoped for. So let me give you some examples of the corruption. It is very hard to start the business because the taxes are so high that the profit is so minimal. So as a result, many business owners go around the system, they befriend the politicians, and they try to pay up some of the politicians so they can run their business. School and university students frequently give bribes to teachers to get good grades on exams or even to be admitted to university or colleges. People in Ukraine in general are very much hurting for money, and many of them resort to all kinds of means to meet their needs. And I personally have witnessed corruption on my last trip to Ukraine. When I tried to return home, I was charged $600 for my luggage that I was not supposed to pay because it was prepaid. And I had to run around the airport for hours and hours, ended up missing my flight, and then missing other 2 flights. I returned home a day and a half later than I was supposed to, completely stressed out by the whole ordeal. So they were looking to profit from me, but that's just the way it goes. The current corruption in Ukraine is connected in many ways to the past connections to Russia. And I think it goes without saying that the current economic difficulties have increased because of Ukraine's current military conflict with Russia. When you have a country at war, it's hard to make a progress economically, especially given the background of Ukraine. You probably know some of the history behind the conflict of Ukraine, but maybe it would be appropriate to mention a couple things and highlight some important things so we can better understand what's going on. So Russian military intervention of Ukraine started in February of 2014 and going into today. And it specifically impacted Crimea and the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. And when I said Donbas, and actually, Jess, can you go to the next page? Next slide there. Yeah, so you can see that in the upper left corner, there's a map of Ukraine. And the blue on the right, we call it Donbas. And it's basically includes 2 big regions, the main cities of which are Donetsk and Lugansk. You can see them on the map there. In November of 2013, this is just a few months before the intervention by Russia, Ukraine was ready to sign association agreement with the European Union. It was a document to establish a free trade and bring Ukraine closer to Europe. And next slide there, Jess. But when obviously for Putin to see Ukraine go west, it was not on his deck of cards, so to speak. He would do anything to make sure Ukraine stays in his sphere of influence. So he met with President Yanukovych, and the guy on the left, and Putin promised him $15 billion of cheap credit and discounted gas. And what it meant basically for Yanukovych is that a lot of that money will go to his pocket. And on our last trip to Ukraine, we visited his residency. You know, it's just something out of this world. It's like it's like a king of the present time living in Ukraine. So because of this, he rejected the opportunity of a European future for Ukraine. And after meeting with Putin, when President Yanukovych announced he will suspend signing the agreement, within hours, thousands took to the streets of Kiev to protest. And in the beginning, it was primarily students. Now you can see on the next picture what was happening. Just a one snapshot of many things that were going on at that time. Over the next 3 months, the protests continued and were largely peaceful until Yanukovych began using police to beat the protesters and firing tear gas. So some days saw hundreds of thousands take part in the demonstrations, and where it was all culminated is in the mid-February of 2014 when police fired live ammunition on crowds, killing 100. And it's a very sad day in Ukrainian history. It's like a bloody Sunday for Ukraine. So as a result, people did not back down. The protesters began taking over government buildings, forcing Yanukovych to flee to Russia. So in this environment, as President Yanukovych took off to Russia, there was a power vacuum in Ukraine. So Ukrainian Rada, which is the Congress of Ukraine, so Rada appointed an acting president and acting prime minister, Turchinov. So that was the same guy who was president and prime minister at the same time. And I believe that this is the first time in the history of politics that one person had both roles to play. So Russia saw this political vacuum in Ukraine as a means or opportunity to invade Ukraine. So as the new coalition was forming, new government was forming, all of a sudden, Ukraine noticed the soldiers with insignias removed from their uniforms, and they were occupying the main parts of Crimea, main buildings of Crimea, and everybody knew they were Russian soldiers. But Putin at first said that they belonged to a local defense militia, but then weeks later recognized that they were Russian soldiers. So Russia almost immediately annexed Crimea, an illegal action that was pretty much rejected by most of the world. For Ukrainians, it was very puzzling that both US, the Obama administration, and Europe were asking Ukraine not to resist Russia. But as Putin took over Crimea and started to go to the eastern part of Ukrainian military, Ukrainian government could not see the country being taken over, so they actually organized and started fighting against Russian invasion. But what's interesting, there's a lot of variables there, a lot of blame to go around. The US government, the European government, the Ukrainian government that was corrupt and allowed invasion of Ukraine in Crimea and the eastern part of Ukraine. And what I mean, the blame of Ukrainian government is because Russian government infiltrated Ukrainian government at the highest level, and Ukraine found itself with the Secretary of Defense. Just think about it. the Secretary of Defense of Ukraine and the Ukrainian head of CIA were both Russian citizens. So how can you resist Russia when you have those two big heads at the top? As the conflicts began to unfold on the eastern part of Ukraine, Russia had the goal to annex 9 regions of Ukraine, and they were mostly Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine. And this is where Ukrainian security and military forces started to resist Russia. But Russia fueled things by providing leadership and funding and heavy weapons and ammunition, and in some cases, and maybe many cases, the regular Russian army to fight the Ukrainian army. And as of today, the conflict claimed 14,000 lives, and as well as it caused about almost 2 million people to abandon their homes. So we have this new guy who's Turchinov, who's acting prime minister and also president of Ukraine, but he's not elected official. He's just appointed by Rada, by the Ukrainian Congress. So Ukraine had to have an election as soon as possible. So in May of 2014, Petro Poroshenko, he came out on scene as a victor in the first round in a special election. And it was the first time in Ukrainian history that in the first round, the president was elected. And it was very important because Ukraine needed commander-in-chief, as Ukraine was setting up on fire by Russia. And forward 5 years, the lack of progress in reducing corruption by Petro Poroshenko, the new president now, and also ongoing conflict with Russia basically crippled Poroshenko and his re-election prospects. He lost by a landslide in April of 2019 to Volodymyr Zelensky, and we know this name now very well, as it was many times in an impeachment inquiry in the last administration. He won by 73% of the vote. That also has never happened in the politics of Ukraine. So he promised fighting the corruption and make reforms and to boost the economy, and also, most importantly, to end the conflict in the Donbas area. The conflict in the East is very convenient to President Putin. It's a way to pressure and destabilize and distract Kiev from making progress and make Ukraine successful and prosperous country. It cost Putin billions and billions of dollars to support that part of the Ukraine. He doesn't need it. There's nothing there left of value except the land, and except as an object of negotiations between the East and the West. Putin knows that if Ukraine prospers, it's the end of his regime. Because if Russian people will see the progress that Ukraine will make or could make, then that they will see and say, this is what we want too. And obviously Putin cannot allow for that to happen. So Zelensky and the Ukrainians, they know they cannot resolve conflict in Donbas, and as long as basically Ukrainians think that as long as Putin is in power, nobody can stop him. Nobody can stop or take the country, Crimea and the eastern part of the country back unless Putin is not there. But at this time, the sanctions are very few. And so this is kind of like everything in a stalemate. So the last point here, why should the United States care so much about Ukraine? It's a country of 5,000 miles away. And the big reason, and this is from perspective of Ukrainians and Ukrainian government, is that US officials in the 90s told the Ukrainians that the United States would take care when negotiating Budapest Memorandum. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but maybe in a nutshell, I'll describe it so we can all understand it. It's a very important document to Ukrainians, at least. It was a security assurances that were signed 25 years ago in 1994. In the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, United States, Russia, and Britain committed to respect the independence and sovereignty and existing borders of Ukraine, and to refrain from the threat or use of force against Ukraine. Now, this was very important because the United States, Britain, and Russia came to Ukraine and said, yes, we know you have the world's third largest nuclear arsenal. This is after the breakup of the Soviet Union. And we don't want that. And if you give up this arsenal, we'll give you security assurances. So if you remember in the 1991, when USSR broke up, there were nuclear weapons scattered in different republics of Soviet Union. And at that time, George W. Bush made the highest priority to make sure this would not lead to increase in number of nuclear weapons states or more nuclear countries that would fight against each other. And they saw how Yugoslavia was breaking apart in the violence, and the Bush administration worried that Soviet collapse might also turn violent, or would rise the potential of conflict among those states. And the Clinton administration pursued the same goal. And in 1994, they gathered to sign this agreement. Jess, can you show the next slide? Let me see. Okay. So these are the three things that were in the Budapest Memorandum, the main three objectives. And you can see from there. So first, Ukraine wanted compensation for the highly enriched uranium. So if they would give up the weapons, they wanted compensation for that uranium because it cost a significant amount of money. Second, the elimination of the missiles and the silos that it housed, and the bombs, and to dismantling all of that was not cheap. So Ukrainian government could not afford the cost at the time. So the United States agreed to cover the costs of that, of the reduction. Also, and the most important one, the Ukraine wanted guarantees or assurances of its security once it got rid of nuclear arms. And the Budapest Memorandum provided security assurances. Unfortunately, Russia has broken this commitment, as we know it. And as Russia invaded Ukraine, Ukraine's government rose up and said, hey, this is the time you can help us. And we were told to stand down. So there's somewhat of a hard feelings, if you can imagine, but the politics, the universal politics is greater than one event in history, right? So Ukraine tried to work through it to make things happen, and to find the friendships in Europe and the United States, and we see some of that happening recently in the last few months by President Zelensky standing the ground, and now he's going to have a meeting with President Biden. So we'll see what comes out of that. Now, Washington, because it said it would act if Russia violated the Budapest Memorandum, the price that Ukraine paid in return for this drastic reduction in the nuclear weapons, they're looking for help from the United States and Europe to provide that. And fortunately, after this trip of Biden administration, of President Biden to the summit, NATO is considering Ukraine as a legal partner not a member yet, but a partner in NATO. So this is a big step for Ukraine. It's a very important step for Ukraine, and a bad sign for Russia. And there's just a final note, and I'm getting my time here getting a little close. Why is this important that Budapest Memorandum is honored? United States, Britain, and Russia came to Ukraine to say, if you get rid of your weapons, we will give you assurances. So if they don't live up to these expectations, what happens if we go to the other countries, the bad actors in this world, places like North Korea? If we tell them, if you give up your weapons, we give you securities against South Korea, Japan, whatnot, what do you think they would say? They will point their finger to Ukraine and say, we saw what you did there. We saw how you honored your agreement. We don't want that. So that's a very critical piece here that our country and Britain and Europe in general need to honor what they say, because it trickles down the line to other countries. So I know there's a lot of variables. There's a lot to discuss. You can do hours and hours on this, but I think I wanted to highlight just the most important ones, at least as it relates to Ukraine from their perspective. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll do my best to answer them.
Great. Dr. Medianick, thank you. Jess, well, hold on for a second, Dr. Medianick. We do want to encourage people to submit some questions. I think you said you'll give us till 9:30. So
Yes.
We want to be able to honor that. And while people at least are thinking, I want to highlight for folks just briefly our upcoming programs. July 14, we have Emerging Great Power Competition in the Arctic with Rebecca Pincus. And I think I won't go into much of the background of some of these presenters, but it's an important topic, one that we haven't often visited, at least here in Reading. So that's July 14. July 21, our topic will be Reflections on Living in the Middle East by a journalist, Jason Casper. He'll reflect on his years of living in the Middle East and working as a reporter in Cairo, for example, and other parts of the Middle East, including Mauritania, Jordan, and Tunisia. Also an interesting topic, we feel. And then an old friend returns to us August 18, Ron Graneri, speaking on the perspectives on the upcoming Germany election. Longtime visitors with us here on our programs will recall Dr. Graneri presenting several times with us. We've also visited with him in Philadelphia. Dr. Graneri as an historian, has studied German history very much. He's very current on Europe and the German perspective, and we think this will be a very good presentation for us all also. So that's the little bit of a shot there for what we have coming up. We do already, I see one chat question that came in that just flashed up for me. Dr. Medianick, what is the level of corruption in Ukraine today? Has it diminished? Is it about what you have been experiencing in the past?
So when Petro Poroshenko, the previous president, when he became president, he made his words at least, made a priority to fight the corruption. Unfortunately, he was the main person in corruption. Many people accused him of selling out to Russia because he's one of the biggest producers of chocolate in the world, and he had his factory, big factory in Russia, while the Ukrainians was fighting Russia. When Ukrainians saw that, that's why they elected President Zelensky. President Zelensky, he is not a politician. as we know it, he was an actor, but very successful in running a business. He had I believe 3,000 employees. So he had excellent organizational skills, but when you dive in head first into the politics of Ukraine, it's very easy to get dirty in it. I mean, by becoming corrupt, because one thing is that everybody wants your attention. So if you know people on top, then you will succeed in your business. And as we know, there's many oligarchs in Ukraine. It's people who, an oligarch is someone who has influence in Rada, the Congress of Ukraine, has influence or has a Ukrainian TV channel. So they have their political influence through that. And President Zelensky is a first-time politician who nobody can personally accuse of being corrupt. But he is like one fish in the ocean. And to make a progress in fighting corruption, when there's many people, many congressmen in the Ukrainian government are in it, to try to persuade them to make policies that are anti-corruption, it's very difficult. So, but at least for the first time in Ukrainian history, we don't have a person at the top who is involved in corruption. Now, as of recent, in the last year or so, Ukrainian government was able to push out a person. His last name is Medvedev. It's not the ex-president of Russia, but it's a Ukrainian Congress person who is what many believe in Ukraine. He's a right hand of Putin in Ukraine. So they were able to push him out of the. He owns 3 stations, and that had a huge influence on Ukrainian perspective. So they were able to get him out, and now he has some criminal charges against him. So we'll see where that takes us. So corruption is great. So it's going to take a while to fight that.
Okay. Dr. Randall Newham, who's a very active member of the World Affairs Council here and a professor at Penn State here in Berks, asks, is there any progress being made, therefore, with Ukraine in joining the European Union?
Yes, so they did join the European Union with a previous administration, President Petro Poroshenko. So they have a status of what they call without visa status, meaning that now Ukrainians can travel to any part of Europe without visa. That was a big deal. So because the Ukrainian economic situation is so poor right now, many Ukrainians, by millions, they go to Europe to work, and they come back to support their families. So they would go for month at a time to work and then bring the monies that they earned back, and to have that status without visa, being a part of that European Union, at least on that level, helps tremendously Ukraine. As far as what can US do to help with memorandum, there is a how can I say this? There's a difference between assurances and the guarantees that United States and the rest of the members of that Budapest Memorandums agreed to. So the guarantees would have implied a commitment of American military force, like a NATO force. But in the language, it was assurance. And of course, you can imagine that that's interpreted in so many different ways. Yeah. So I think what the Ukraine needs to do, not to look for help really on the outside. They just need to make progress with economy. Ukraine has amazing potential. They have so much of natural resources that most of the world would just be thrilled to have. The people are very bright, very educated. They can make a huge progress there. They need to concentrate on rebuilding their military, making it strong. It's already one of the strongest militaries in Europe, but they have to make it so strong that Russia would consider, think twice before they make advancements against Ukraine again.
Okay, I think you did answer David Carroll's question about the security issues. Dr. Medianick, if I'm recalling correctly, Ukraine was sometimes referred to as the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. Am I recalling that correctly? That the great agricultural presence within the economy of the Ukraine, is that still a factor? Or am I recalling it incorrectly?
Ukraine is amazing in agriculture. The land is just God-given to this only one part of the world. There's 3 foot of black, rich topsoil in most parts of Ukraine. You can grow anything there, given the climate and the season, obviously. So Ukraine in the old USSR they were calling, yes, a breadbasket of Ukraine, because it was feeding the whole country and Europe. So yes, the agriculture has a lot of potential. There is a talk right now about privatizing the land, which will give many agricultural companies the rights to the land, so they can treat it as their own and make it even better. So yes, it's amazing. It's amazing land. When we drove to the eastern part of Ukraine, it took us 12 hours, 14 hours to get there, and it was just fields of wheat and sunflower and just miles and miles and miles and miles. It's really incredible. It's something to see. And actually, one note here: Ukrainian flag is, if you ever seen it, it's yellow on the bottom and blue on the top. Yellow is wheat on the bottom, representing wheat, bread, life, and blue is the sky, freedom. So when you drive through Ukraine, that's what you see: the yellow and the blue, or many parts of Ukraine, the wheat and the blue sky.
Well, wonderful. Well, Dr. Medianick, we want to honor and respect your time. I know that I believe your office is opening. You'll be in somebody's mouth in about a half hour. So we thank you very kindly. This worked out very well for us. A year ago, you were going to be making this presentation, and then COVID hit, and you kindly agreed to revisit the topic for us and agreed then to make this presentation today. And we respect that, and thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. If anyone would like to make a donation to support your work or those of others in the Ukraine, I'm sure they might be able to do that by sending it to you directly at the Boulevard Dental Associates. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yes, you probably want to do that. If you do that, you can put Tim Medianick and make a note. It's for donation to the Ukrainian, to Ukraine. Yeah. Thank you so much, Salman. That's very kind of you. I really appreciate that. We can definitely use resources when we go to Ukraine. It really is unlimited, and people appreciate. And when we do those tokens of those little gifts to the kids or to the soldiers, just paying for gas to Ukrainian soldiers, from the donations. It's they see America in different light, and they really appreciate. They don't know who you are, but they really, really appreciate that.
Well, that's wonderful. Just a personal note for you: are your parents still living, and all that they endured to make things happen for you and your family? Or
yeah, it's amazing. My parents were 42 years old when they came over here, and I'm 43. They came with 10 kids. I can't imagine doing that. My dad passed away 3 years ago, he had a cancer, thyroid issues and a cancer, colon cancer. And we believe he was an ambulance driver, like I mentioned before. We believe that that came from when he was in 1986, when Chernobyl happened. He was in the vicinity, helping out and transporting and all that. So all those things that the doctors were saying that he had as far as relates to his cancer, where we could trace it to the radiation, possible radiation exposure at that time. So he is not with us anymore, but my mom is here. She lives in near Honeybrook, about half an hour away. So yeah.
Oh, good Pennsylvania Dutch territory down
Yeah.
there, right off of Route 23.
Yes.
So, well, great. Well, Dr. Medianick, we were able to track audience attention, and to some degree, you've kept it throughout. And we really appreciate this, and welcome you to join us at any time for any of our programs. And perhaps at some point you might be willing to reconsider revisiting with us to report further on your activities as time moves along. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Solomon. I really appreciate it.
And take care, everyone. Our program is concluded, and everyone have a good rest of your day.